Good evening. I'd like to call the September 10th meeting of the Eugene Planning Commission to order. Tonight we're going to hold a public hearing before the Planning Commission to consider a package of code amendments pertaining to single-family development. Before I begin, I'd like the Planning Commissioners to introduce themselves and then provide some time for staff to introduce the topic before we begin taking testimony. My name is Bill Randall. I am the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission, and the other Planning Commissioners are, and we'll start at this end.
Rick Duncan.
I don't think it was.
No, you don't, President.
I think it's on anyway.
Rick Duncan.
John Jaworski, Vice Chair.
Jeff Mills.
John Belcher.
And John Borofsky.
Thank you. And tonight we also have members of city staff present. We have Alyssa Hanson, Carolyn Burke with the Planning Division, and Christy Brown with Building Permit Services. For this hearing, we'll begin with a brief presentation from staff and then open the public hearing. If anyone in the audience would like to speak, as Alyssa mentioned earlier, please fill out a request to speak form and bring it forward to staff. If you've not done that yet or feel you'd like to do that during the meeting, that is fine. Because of the amount of testimony expected, we will be limiting 3 minutes per person. And so just a reminder, the Planning Commission will not make a final decision on these proposed amendments. We will be, however, making a recommendation to City Council, who will hold their own public hearings before making a final decision. So with that, I'd like to officially have Alyssa start her presentation. Sorry.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you all for attending. Tonight's public hearing is on a package of code amendments related to single-family housing in the R1 low-density residential zone. And there are 3 main topic areas. The first is to add compatibility standards for secondary dwelling units, which are already permitted in the R1 zone, to add compatibility standards for existing alley access lots as well as for any newly created lots, and to add the compatibility standards for accessory buildings. The second topic is to allow for new alley access lots in certain areas. And then third, interim protection measures that would apply in Amazon, Fairmont, and the South University neighborhoods. And these would prohibit certain dwelling types and land divisions as well as limit certain uses. And these would remain in place until more comprehensive planning of these areas would be completed. And it would be that a new set of standards would replace these standards. So these code amendments are a part of an implementation of Envision Eugene, and they do that in 3 ways. First, they implement the goals of the Infill Compatibility Standards Project. Second, they address housing affordability by expanding housing choice and providing variety by facilitating really smaller housing types. And then third, they help accommodate a portion of the city's 20-year need for single-family housing. Now, these code amendments have actually been talked about for a long time, as early as 2007 as part of the Infill Compatibility Standards Project. There was a task team involved there, and a number of recommendations that included secondary dwelling units, alley access lots, accessory buildings, as well as development around the university area. And those recommendations and some of the recommendations that came out of working groups after Infill Compatibility Standards Task Team are really the foundation for these amendments. The need for these compatibility standards was really reiterated during the Envision Eugene public process. We heard a lot of public comment about the need for infill compatibility standards, particularly in the single-family neighborhoods. And then following all of that, we formed an advisory group that was actually basically members from an Infill Compatibility Standards working group. And they worked to vet the concepts that were ultimately turned into the draft code before you. Now, the draft language is, as we've written in the staff report, is intended to be a starting point for the public and the Planning Commission's consideration. And we've definitely received a lot of testimony. The packet, there are 45 pieces that are included in the public hearing packet. Since that time, I've emailed another 36 in 2 separate packages to the Planning Commission. All of those are available on the web. And then tonight, before the Planning Commission, you have before you all testimony that had come in by 3:50 this afternoon. And so, my 3 minutes up?
saw me.
Okay. And there's 6 pieces of testimony in front of you tonight, and there may be more sitting back on my computer, and I'll get that to you as soon as possible. In terms of next steps, the Planning Commission is scheduled to deliberate starting first on September 30th, and there's a second meeting scheduled for October 7th. Those are Mondays. They're at 11:30 in the at the Atrium building, in the downstairs in the Sloat room. What the Planning Commission will ultimately do is provide a recommendation to the City Council. There's a City Council public hearing planned for November 18th, and it's anticipated that they will take action by the end of the year. And just for my legal requirements, we did send notice consistent with the Eugene Code provisions, and the applicable criteria are found in Eugene Code Section 9.8065, which are the Land Use Code Amendment approval criteria. And that concludes my statement.
Okay. Thank you, Alyssa. So now I'd like to officially open the public hearing of the Eugene Planning Commission. When you come up, Commissioner Jaworski will call your name and the person that will be coming up after you, so that you can be ready. And when you come up, please give us your name and address before beginning your testimony. As I mentioned, with the number of people wishing to testify tonight, we will be limiting testimony to 3 minutes. Staff will be keeping that time. And so as a courtesy to all, we'd ask when the timer goes off, please wrap up your testimony. And we also encourage you to submit any written testimony you may have as well, and then we can have that as part of the record for our deliberations. So, who's first?
With that, our first presenter is Paul Conte, followed by Bill Aspegren. Wow. Good evening. My name is Paul Conte. I live at 1461 West 10th Avenue in the Fightin' First Ward. I've submitted a detailed written critique and recommendations. Tonight I want to emphasize a few points about the proposed code to allow alley access only lots. First, let me say that I support the concept, and as some of you know, I drafted the code for Eugene's only zone that allows alley access only lots. Quite a bit of research and community involvement went into that, which was one of the reasons it got such good community support and a no vote in the council. But the draft R1 code that's before you for alley access only lots is dead on arrival. One, the only empirical data provided by staff is filled with errors and completely unreliable. Excuse me. I've submitted to you the results of my doing an on-the-ground assessment of the maps that purport to show potential alley access only lots, and there are lots shown there as alley access only lots that are not accessible from the alley, and there are many lots that might be alley access only lots that are not recorded. So you really don't have any evidence in front of you. Two, the minimum lot sizes conflict directly with the R1 maximum density, as well as the Metro Plan low-density residential designation that applies to most of the R1 areas. That's not legal under state land use code. Three, there's been no evidence gathered and no analysis conducted to demonstrate compliance with applicable Metro Plan policies that require preventing or mitigating the impacts of increased density. This won't be sustained at LUBA unless there is actually the evidence and analysis to support the conclusion that there is consistency with those policies. Four, there has been no evidence gathered and no analysis conducted to demonstrate compliance with applicable transplant policies that require ensuring safe and convenient travel by vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists, and individuals with disabilities. Five, there has been no analysis of how the proposed code conforms to Eugene's.
To the mic.
Say what?
Closer to the mic.
Okay. Can you hear this? Okay.
Oh, that's better, much better.
Okay.
I'm pleased people want to actually hear
We
what I
can
have to
hear him
say.
because he's facing us, so I'm sorry.
Okay. There has been no analysis of how the proposed code conforms to Eugene's growth management policies, which also require preventing or mitigating the impacts of increased density. Six, there's no explanation of what is to be accomplished by alley development. Is it a lane? Is it courtyards between the street dwelling and alley dwelling? Consequently, the standards make no sense and appear simply to be designed to allow slightly smaller dwellings than a large street-oriented dwelling. 7, the allowable face walls and scale are grossly too large and would have major negative impacts on adjacent residents' backyards. 8, no thought or analysis appears to have gone into the adequacy of alley infrastructure, including for travel by vehicle, foot, bicycle, or wheelchair. So in this respect, the sooner the planning commissioners pulled the provisions to allow creation of new alley access only lots and give them further consideration, the more deliberation and public involvement you can allocate to correcting deficiencies in the other draft code. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conti.
Paul Aspergren, and will be followed by Sue Pritchard.
Bill Asperger.
Bill Aspergren, I'm sorry.
I'm Bill Aspergren, 1939 Alder Street here in Eugene.
And if you could get right into the mic.
Right into it,
please.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm 1939 Alder Street here in Eugene, Ward 3. In the interest of saving time and I'm not going to go over the remarks I made in my written testimony.
Bill, I'm sorry, people aren't hearing you. I think we need to get
The-
really
these,
close to it,
these
but-
mics, I think, if you get just right up next to it.
Right up there.
That's
move
the,
it towards you.
Yeah.
yeah.
There you
Well,
go.
does that work? Is that better?
That's better for
okay.
me. Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay, I'm not going to go over my written testimony or the letter that was sent from the neighborhood leaders, which I signed. I have read in some detail, all the written testimony, and that's online, and I'd like to comment on that at this time. First, the majority of the comments supported the amendments and the protections. Most of the comments against implementing the proposed changes were centered on the interim protections and concerned the prohibition of SDUs. The interim protections were suggested by the city until a plan could be created that would protect and enhance the livability of neighborhoods surrounding the university. I support prohibiting the SDUs until a plan is in place and feel this will provide an incentive to get the neighborhood plan done quickly. However, so as not to put an undue burden on families that have an immediate need for an SDU, I believe it is appropriate to consider some alternatives, and that should be discussed. Otherwise, all the interim protections should be in effect until the final plan is approved. And speaking of SDUs, one letter suggested that SDUs be treated the same as single-family homes with no separate restrictions. This same approach would also apply to alley access only lots or houses. To see how misguided this idea is, look at the testimony showing pictures of the 2,800 square foot house currently being built on an alley lot in South University. This house is destined to be rented to probably 5 students. The 14-foot wide gravel alley was never intended for the traffic this house will generate, and who knows if the sewers can handle increases of this nature. South University's infrastructure was never intended to handle the hidden density that exists as a result of developments like this. There are also other pictures of an SDU in Amazon that shows the damage they can inflict on neighbors if they're not controlled. And then I have one other suggestion, and this will probably raise a few eyebrows. It may be time to consider reducing the number of unrelated people living in an R1 rental units. Removing some of the financial incentives to buy houses and turn them into rentals may make them more attractive as affordable single-family homes. It would also funnel student renters to the overabundance of student apartments that have been built in Eugene. In summary, I ask the Planning Commission to review the proposed changes with a broad perspective and consider what will enhance the livability and common good of our community and the neighborhoods. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sue Pritchard, followed by John Lawless.
Yes.
Good evening.
Excuse me just a second.
Excuse me, Sue. Are we sure that the mics are going to pick this up? It seems to me we're hearing a lot of echoing.
That's what happens in this room, so they are working now.
Okay, so we're going to pick up a clear, okay, thank you.
In the recording, I think is what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Good evening.
Hi.
My name is Sue Pritchard, and I live in the same house on Emerald Street in the Amazon neighborhood that I've lived in for 43 years. There are 3 parts to my testimony tonight. First about the code amendments, then about the interim protection measures, and then about enforcement. So regarding the single-family proposed code amendments, as you know, these amendments came primarily from the neighborhoods. It was a way to mitigate the negative impacts of infill. This is what neighborhoods want in order to help preserve what they love about where they live. I checked my computer today. to see that the first meeting of ICS occurred at the end of 2007. Paul and I were co-chairs of that. That was nearly 6 years ago. These proposed code amendments have been thoroughly discussed, debated, and reviewed, and I believe after 6 years of working on them, they should be adopted immediately. Some would say they are not enough, and I agree with that, but they are better than what we currently have, and we should just get them adopted. Regarding the interim protection measures, the request for these measures is a result of vulnerable neighborhoods feeling that the proposed code amendments are not enough to save their neighborhoods from continual decline in livability. I support the request. While SUMA, Fairmount, and Amazon are quite different from each other, they all have suffered significant changes and changes that have not enhanced livability. I believe it's critical that a more refined process is developed for each of these neighborhoods to specifically address their unique conditions. Regarding enforcement, this has been my issue from the very beginning of the ICS process, and I feel just as strongly about it today as I did then. We need to develop a culture of strict enforcement of our existing code. In my opinion, and in my direct experience, there are weak consequences for people who violate the code by building illegal SUDs, by renting to more than 5 unrelated students, by failing to have an owner-occupant in either the SDU or the main house, and by illegally converting garages, sheds, and accessory buildings to SDUs. Within 2 blocks of my house on Emerald Street, there are 6 illegally occupied SDUs, and that's just within 2 blocks. This is my personal opinion, but I believe strongly that if the current code were strictly enforced, with significant consequences and regular follow-up to keep people honest, most of Amazon neighborhoods' complaints about infill would go away. And finally, I would ask that the 40 or so letters that were written on August 10th or thereabouts by the Amazon neighbors in favor of the interim protection measures be included in the public record. Thank you.
John Lawless, followed by Stephen Asbury.
Good evening. My name is John Lawless. I'm at 90 East 26th Avenue, Eugene. I'm an Amazon neighbor property owner. I'm a local architect and a former planning commissioner. I've submitted written testimony and some details that I won't go over this evening about just some suggestions for fine-tuning some of the code language. In essence, I generally support the proposed draft single-family code amendments with the exception of the interim protection measures that specifically prohibit secondary dwellings, duplex, triplex, fourplex development, and the creation of alley access and flag lots. While I understand the negative impact of incompatible, inappropriate, and often illegal development currently experienced in the neighborhoods adjoining the university, I believe that a blanket prohibition on virtually all R1 infill development is unnecessary and excessive at this point. Eugene needs to continue supporting compatible infill development. The proposed draft single-family code amendments with some minor adjustments, I believe, go a long way toward addressing many of the fundamental development problems that seem to be causing the greatest harm to the quality of the existing neighborhoods. And if put in place quickly, these could mitigate a great deal of the problem. This approach would avoid penalizing current property owners who wish to pursue legitimate, legal, and relatively compatible development of their property without having to wait for what could be a multi-year process to release these prohibitions while the city and neighborhoods develop a specific area plan. Such a wait could be detrimental to long-held financial planning, retirement income expectations, family real estate succession goals, and other things that are really non-political. I believe in incremental progress towards our community goals of compatible infill development and would rather see the currently proposed R1 amendments begin to do their primary job of guiding the design fundamentals of community-supported infill development in all neighborhoods as soon as possible. Then use this next period of time to thoughtfully develop the specific fine-tuning of an area plan that further addresses the nuances that may be appropriate to enhancing the effectiveness of the newly adopted code language. If approached in this manner, there is a greater incentive to develop the area plan more quickly while still allowing the advancement of community-desired, legitimate, legal, and hopefully much more compatible projects by neighborhood property owners. With the proposed interim protection measures prohibiting certain residential infill and property types in place, no further positive development contributions would be able to be made for an undetermined amount of time, and there would potentially be less incentive on some parts to achieve a rapid acceptance of an area plan that would lift the prohibitions and fine-tune it. For these reasons, I request that the Planning Commission recommend the adjusted single-family family code amendments without the proposed interim measures that I mentioned above, and forward that to the City Council for approval. I've attached a brief list of suggested adjustments that are technical in nature. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Asbury, followed by Chad Wilson.
Hold on just one second. Yep.
Okay. And could I maybe ask that you not clap after testimony so that it doesn't necessarily influence one opinion over another? And then that way everyone can feel comfortable sharing their opinion, whether it appears to be popular or not. Thank you.
Stephen Asbury, 1603 East 22nd in Eugene. Members of the Planning Commission, you should have received testimony tonight in the form of a letter signed by 37 leaders of Eugene area neighborhoods. Briefly, that letter outlines our overwhelming support for the draft R1 code amendments and the interim protection measures that go along with that. It also includes our strong recommendations in 5 areas where we see potential problems. I'd also like to give my own opinion on a couple of recommendations to the plan and adjustments to the plan. First, the minimum lot size to allow a secondary dwelling unit needs to be at least 6,300 square feet. This would put it within the R1 maximum density of 14 dwelling units per net acre. Second, the draft code's vague and inadequate approval criteria needs to be replaced with clear criteria that will protect neighborhood livability. Provisions in the draft code would allow virtually unlimited increases in building height and square footage and reductions in setbacks that are based on vague criteria such as compatible relationship and relates to design. Such vague standards would inevitably lead to abuse and an increase in appeals. Third, the protection should not allow for any removal of vegetation or allow parking in front of any house or structure itself. Fourth, I think, as many people have said tonight, enforcement must be addressed as part of this plan. And finally, I concur with others in that it's time to reduce the number of unrelated people living in R1 rental units. Many parts of the Fairmont and South University neighborhoods currently exceed the maximum density standards for low-density residential areas. We continue to see construction of high-density single units designed with the clear intent of renting to large numbers of university students. Even landlords who abide by the 5 unrelated tenant rule find that students often have their girlfriends or boyfriends living with them, and this often increases the occupancy to 7 students or more. This results in a significant amount of hidden density, not counted by the city. Reducing the number of unrelated people living in rentals would also funnel student renters to the overabundance of student apartments currently under construction or having just been completed in the neighborhood and continue to be built in our neighborhood. We encourage the conversion of some of these properties back to affordable single-family homes, which I think benefits everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chad Wilson, followed by Tom Atley.
Chad Wilson. I have 2 properties, one at 1777 East 30th Avenue, one at 1785 East 30th Avenue, barely, unfortunately, located within the Fairmont Neighborhood Association. So my question is, I have 2 lots there, they're 0.67 of an acre. I have a secondary dwelling already located on one. And would this stop me from building another secondary dwelling on the other empty lot I have? If I were to build a house on it, say 3,500 square foot house, and implement like a mother-in-law quarters, guest quarters, if this passed, would I be able to do that? Anybody know? Any ideas?
I'm not sure. We're
We
taking
don't typically
testimony
answer
tonight.
questions
We typically
during
don't answer
testimony, but-
questions during a public hearing.
All right. Well, it seems like it's kind of a one-size-fits-all. I mean, my properties are located, it's on the 4th hole Laurelwood Golf Course. Long ways away from this yet. I'd still be, this would affect the property that I purchased in 2003, with intent of doing this at some point. So, I don't know. I think it just needs to be looked at very closely, and I don't think we can just say that, this is what it is and it's going to be implemented everywhere. I just think it would be very unfair for some of us. I mean, I'm into mine for about $250,000, and if I can't, develop these the way I'd like to, then, it would be a significant impact on myself and my family.
Thank you.
Tom Atlee, followed by T. Richard Heinzl. Still. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Tom Atlee. I live at 1680 Walnut Street in a 107-year-old property that has in two large units on 9 bedrooms. And I think that kind of concentrated living, we're in a cooperative, and it's very healthy for planning for the future, which is going to be very different from the past in terms of climate change and peak oil and stuff like that. But that's a much larger issue. My main thing I wanted to communicate, which I have a submission before you in from Walnut Street Co-op, is one of the sections in section 17 in the proposed amendments is very ambiguous and suggests that houses like ours, if we wanted to do any improvements on it at all, suddenly we would end up with, down to the 3-bedroom limit, which would be devastating. There's an awful lot of homes around that have more than 3 bedrooms in it that would be grandfathered in, except the way this is phrased suggests that any changes we make, not the addition of new bedrooms, but any changes would result in us suddenly being subject to the reduced bedroom size. So I have submitted an alternative language for Section 17, which says that in the R1 zone within the city recognized boundaries of Amazon Neighbors, Fairmont Neighbors, and South University Neighborhood Association, no more than 3 bedrooms shall be allowed in a dwelling, which I disagree with, but I am not taking issue with at this point. This standard applies to new dwellings and to additions of bedrooms to pre-existing dwellings. This standard does not apply to additions, expansions, or alterations of pre-existing dwellings with 4 or more bedrooms if the addition, expansion, or alteration is for a purpose other than adding bedrooms, as demonstrated by permits and/or actual use.
Thank you.
Ty Richard Heinzl, followed by Margaret Moore.
My name is Richard Heinzl. Am I on here?
Yes.
I've lived in South University neighborhood since 1970, and up until a couple of years ago, the 4 properties that are contingent to mine were all student occupied. So I've had some experience living with students. I want to say that Ms. Pritchard and Mr. Lawless have more eloquently described why you should support this than I can. I was very impressed by the letter that was sent out telling me about this hearing, because I thought it was right on when they said limit further negative impact and increase in unintended housing. I've seen that happen, and I think that I'm here just simply to support this. I think there's a lot of pressure on people who have bought properties as investments to increase the student housing, and I think it should be done in a deliberate manner, and that since the pressure is on, I think these interim prohibitions are necessary until everything else is in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Margaret Moore, followed by Libby Botero.
My name is Margaret Moore, and I live at 1862 Taylor Street. I empathize with the people who live in these neighborhoods and are having trouble with students. My neighborhood is quite a bit different. I own my house. I live in it with my husband and my daughter, And when I read the article in the paper about a woman who wanted to build a unit to be close to her children and her family, I thought that's something I'd like to do someday. And the height restriction worries me that it wouldn't make it desirable to do that in the place where I am. I'm concerned about a one-size-fits-all kind of restriction across Eugene that would prevent me from building a unit that I would like to have. My property butts up against a street and a park. It's situated in a way that even my neighbors, if they built a unit, it wouldn't impinge on my property. So I don't share the desire to restrict the height. I was looking forward to being able to build a unit like that, and making the units smaller, restricting the height would change a lot of my plans for me.
Thank you.
Libby Botero, followed by Robert Gaff.
Hi, good evening. Libby Botero. We own 2 properties in Amazon neighborhood, 2650 University and 2797 University, which we co-own with our children and to which we're are moving into gradually. We've lived in the Amazon neighborhood since 1989. And I'd like to comment on some of the Envision Eugene planning goals and proposed single-family code amendments. I support the Envision Eugene planning goals, the 7 pillars or guiding principles, which focus on affordable housing, climate change and energy efficiency, sustainable development within the urban growth boundary, improved public transportation, bike paths, protection of natural resources, and flexible implementation and economic opportunity. These goals guide the planning for increased density and needed infill, as is happening in communities all over the country as well as in Oregon. However, I am opposed to the proposed interim protection measures for single-family neighborhoods around the University of Oregon, Amazon, Fairmount, and South University. I think they're much too restrictive, limiting new and remodeled homes to only 3 bedrooms, prohibiting new SDUs and alley access lots, flag lots, and prohibiting duplexes on corner lots. I think it's just too unreasonable, and I think it's unfair. More importantly, I would say this is my main point, the proposed code amendments for the area around U of O are inconsistent with the Envision Eugene planning goals, especially those goals that focus on affordable housing for all income levels, including expanding housing variety and choice by facilitating the very kinds of additional housing that the proposed interim protective measures seek to exclude. I'd like to point out the Bring Home and Garden Tour for Sustainable Living that was this weekend. 3 homes on the Bring Tour, one in Fairmount, one in South Eugene, and one that was on the Bring Tour last year in Amazon neighborhood that focus on green building, energy, water efficiency, etc. Wonderful examples of what we'd like to see. However, if the proposed protective measures in the code had been in place, none of these amazing homes could have been built. First example from the tour, 1799 Fairmount, designed by Dr. Mark Gillum of the Urban Collective and professor of U of O School of Architecture. I'm sure if you've seen that building, you know if it's great things. Is that my time? Okay, well, I just finished my sentence. The other 2 are 2244 Alder co-housing, which has more than 5 unrelated people, and the Fairmount house has more than 3 bedrooms. And the last one, 2750 University, which has a very nice SDU, 3-bedroom SDU, very green housing, and again, fits in wonderfully with the neighborhood. So I'd like to see more of those, not less.
Thank you.
Robert Gaff, followed by Carrie Parsons.
My name is Robert Grafe. I live at 1935 Madison Street. I'll be brief, I'd just like to make a few points. R1 zoning is defined as low density. Increasing density in a designated low density zone is contrary to its definition. When a secondary dwelling unit is built on a property, it lowers the value of the neighboring properties. Potential buyers of an R1 zone property will be less interested in a property next to a secondary dwelling unit. This has the effect of the neighboring property owners subsidizing the SDU property by taking a loss on their own property. Allowing multiple dwelling units in an R1 zone neighborhood is tantamount to changing the zoning, but without the required process that calls for neighborhood involvement. Existing neighborhoods were designed and built for the density that exists. Forcing higher density spoils the nature and character of the existing neighborhood. Property owners interested in the existing character of the neighborhood, property owners invested in the existing character of the neighborhood. Changing that takes away part of that investment. Statistics show that increased housing density results in higher crime rates. Eugene already has 2 zones that are designated for higher density. Anyone who wants an additional unit or more may do so in an R2 or an R3 zone. I would like to propose that this moratorium be made permanent and extended to include all neighborhoods in R1 zones. I live in the Friendly area neighborhood, and I'm concerned that the moratorium on the adjoining neighborhoods will just force this problem outward and into my neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Carrie Parsons, followed by Brian Weaver.
My name is Kari Parsons, and I reside at 2215 University Street. Thank you for your service to our community. I wish I had time to say what a sustainable and wonderful lifestyle the university-adjacent neighborhoods afford those who live there, but I think that's evident by all the people that are here fighting for maintaining those neighborhoods. Overall, I'd like to express my support for the R1 proposals and the interim protection measures. I've submitted my written testimony, which recommends some important changes. I want to speak to one of those recommendations, and that is the need for an occupancy limit of 3 unrelated individuals added to the interim protection measures. The concept behind the interim protection measures is good. It's going to hold the line on the persistent degradation of our neighborhoods until a more comprehensive planning process can be completed for the university-adjacent neighborhoods. The interim protections are designed to give us some breathing room, and the provisions are good for the most part. However, as written, they still will not hold the line on the single most destructive force in our neighborhoods, and that is the steady conversion of owner-occupied homes to rental-occupied homes. Currently, when a property can be rented to 5 unrelated individuals, the economics encourage investors to buy up formerly owner-occupied properties and rent them to as many people as they are allowed. If the house doesn't have enough bedrooms, the economics are in favor of converting garages or adding bedrooms, often filling up yard space in the process. At about $600 a bedroom, rent of $1,800 for 3 individuals versus rent of $3,000 for 5 people makes a big difference in the bottom line. Few families can afford $3,000 in rent, nor compete in a bidding war with investors looking to gain that much income. As such, the economics are strongly in favor of absentee investors and not in favor of current or future resident homeowners. We must shift the economics of the university-adjacent neighborhoods by including in the interim protections a phased-in occupancy limit starting at 4 and then moving to 3. The phasing allows property owners to adjust. Those that have wisely diversified their investment by maintaining a home that is appealing to student renters as well as families looking to buy will do just fine. It's important to note that occupancy limits of 3 unrelated individuals are commonplace code in municipalities nationwide as well as here in Oregon. In fact, I'm told that the city of Medford has an occupancy limit of 2. Without a stricter occupancy limit added to the interim protections, we will continue to see the rapid conversion of owner-occupied homes to rental occupancy. By the time the planning process is complete for our neighborhoods, the damage will be done and largely irreversible. I ask you to proactively protect our neighborhoods during this planning process as the interim protection measures intend and add an occupancy limit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brian Weaver, followed by Carolyn Jacobs.
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Brian Weaver. I live at 1365 Grant Street. That's in West Eugene. After hearing the testimony, clearly one size doesn't fit all. Please find what I provided. It's a plot drawing of my property. It's the scale. I drew this years ago. It's 20 to scale, and the lot measure is 55 by 160. And if you look on the left side of the drawing, it'd be the north end, next to 13th Alley. You can see where the two rental. I live at 1365, and the rental is 1355. It's a duplex. It's the 1930, 1940 built. Anyway, it was grandfathered and non-conforming. Moved clear up to the alley. There's not much of a setback there, as you notice. Anyway, the resulting, it to the south of the lot, it leaves a big open area, which I've cross-hatched in to include setbacks. And so I've got an open area there within the setbacks of almost 1,800 square feet. So 800 square foot house, studio, cottage, whatever, would fit there, no problem. It wouldn't impact the neighborhood. It's right on the corner. And it would enhance Envision Eugene for infill. And also, furthermore, my rental, I charge $530 a month. That's at 1355 site. That's 750 square feet. I did real well financing, so I passed the savings on to a tenant. The guy that just moved out, he was there for about 8 years. So that's the benefit about providing a good deal. We talk about low-income housing, that sort of thing. I'm not looking to make money. I'm just looking to cover my mortgage. So anyway, that's why I'm here. I'd like to put an 800 square foot single-story house at the south end of that lot. If you'd like, you can drive by and take a look at it. Right now I've got a laurel hedge around that end, but feel free to take a peek behind it. There's an open area where you can either get out of your vehicle and look, or you can drive by and look. Anyway, I feel for the people in West Amazon or East Amazon and problems over there, but I don't think one size fits all. I'm sure there's other people with my situation that can provide a service to the city in terms of low income and facilitating Envision Eugene. So please keep the drawing, take a look, and consider issues like this when you make up your decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Carolyn Jacobs, followed by David Sonakasan.
Carolyn Jacobs, 2040 Agate Street. In the University neighborhood, many older traditional R1 homes, as well as new R1 projects, are no longer single-family residences, nor can they really be called multifamily units. They may be single units, but at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or more bedrooms, they are high-density single units. Besides the recent proliferation of newly built high-density single units and the change from owner-occupied to rental of older homes, we've also experienced a long history of planning policies that have allowed extra units on lots not big enough to meet the standard of 14 units per net acre. And then many secondary units, of course, were never even permitted. and there's never been any enforcement to speak of. The result is that today many blocks in our neighborhoods already exceed the maximum density standards for low-density residential areas. We are out of compliance with both city code zoning standards and the Metro Plan. It's impossible for us to continue to absorb this level of increasing density without code protections. That said, while the goal of our recommendations was protection of the viability of our neighborhoods, it was never, ever our intention to unduly restrict in the process any on-site owners who are honestly looking to build something in the interest of their families. So after reading the comments and listening to people's concerns, I'm going to offer a possible two-part suggestion. Given that the issues around SDUs require immediate attention, and the city's planning process for the area will not move quickly enough on this particular piece, I might suggest that the neighborhoods proceed to initiate the process by hiring a planner and conducting a community process committed to the end of 2014 for adoption of final SDU codes. For the interim one-year period, we will allow the permitting of SDUs that comply with standards that can protect the privacy of adjacent properties and the livability of the surrounding areas, which is all we really wanted in the first place. So this might include, slope setback envelope of some certain size, a bedroom or occupancy limit, maybe height or square footage limit, and of course the ability to only rent one unit. The interim standards would sunset at the end of 2014 with the final SDU code adoption. If the record was left open for a week, we could offer more thorough suggestions.
Thank you. Thank you. David Sonicson, followed by Mary Rowland.
Thank you. David Sonicson, Skyline Boulevard, Eugene. I agree with the recommendations just posed by Carolyn Jacobs. I strongly support the interim protection measures while acknowledging concerns of residents who actually live in their houses and have legitimate reasons for wanting to add a secondary dwelling. Not only should we expedite the interim measures, we should engage in the expedition of special area planning as well that Carolyn just mentioned. Put it on a super fast track involving everyone with concerns, get the planning done, write code that can and will be enforced, and then get back to living our lives in neighborhoods which retain the values we came here to share. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mary Rowland, followed by Michael Lewis.
My name's Mary Rowland. I live at 2975 Friendly. My husband and I have been in this residence since 1984, and we've raised our 3 kids, all in college now. I came tonight because we tried to build a secondary dwelling, and the city made it extremely difficult. We ended up building a unit, but not making it a full secondary dwelling. Too many hoops to jump through, far too costly. We hired an architect. We have a beautiful room up there just to use as a studio, but I'm frustrated because, I've lived in this house. We love the eclectic neighborhood of Friendly Street. We're in the Friendly neighborhood. Up the hill from us is a neighbor who's pushed a trailer onto the property, and I've called the city, and that's legal to have somebody living in there. Across the street from me, there's what my family refers to as the gypsy wagon, living right on Friendly, and there's no plumbing to that unit. He puts a bucket in and out of his place, and he's got a dog in there. It's about 5 by 7 on wheels. You can drive up the street and see it right next to the fire hydrant. And, you know, I walk my dog through the neighborhoods, down Friendly Street, the alleys. There's many, many, many illegal secondary dwellings. I would like to see the city just maybe enforce the codes that we have in place. I'm not opposed to secondary dwellings if they're done with guidelines that are enforced. I think it's, you can't make it so difficult that people can't comply with the law, but all you have to do is walk the alleys in the friendly neighborhood and you'll see a multitude of secondary dwellings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Lewis, followed by Christine Patchinsley or Ratchinsley.
Michael Lewis, am I close enough to the microphone? I saw. I reside at 2765 Agate. I have been there for a number of years. I'm at the end of the street, of Agate Street, so I just get to see the rental conversions as I drive to the north down Agate Street, and it's been an interesting progression. But the reference goes back at least 10 or 15 years where the city's been considering the same topic. And I think that the Planning Commission, when you make your recommendation to the City Council, should consider the fact that all this was vetted many years ago, even before Chapter 9 was amended the last major go-around, that the standard allowing infill was going to lead to the problems we have now. And how do we avoid that? I would suggest that the only way this can really be done, first of all, we should ignore those who only focus it as an economic opportunity for themselves. That's not the issue because of the impact on the neighborhood. Secondly, the city does have an avenue that would protect the community, and that would be to increase the system development charges on applications for these units to allow the city to hire architectural review, and we could be spending time developing standards for what that architectural review would consist of. It could be things such as setback, window alignment, customized design, and even the design as its compatibility for the neighborhood. Some people like things that are built, but some people do not, but there are ways to have this reviewed with the people who are causing the problem or wanting to make the impact paying for the review on an individual basis. If we only try to minimize their costs and their contribution to the problem that they create, we will not be able to solve the problem. People complain about a one style is going to fit all. That is a problem. But I would suggest that the city should be increasing charges for these infill departments. This was a recommendation that I made 15 years ago. I made it 10 years ago. I made it when Chapter 9 was going forward. I'm only recommending it now because no one wants to do that, because everyone says, you may not have to spend more money for changing the character of my neighborhood, and no one wants to do that. But I propose that as a way to customize the impact of the indwelling. Also, we should put in red letters that it isn't that the infill is not only to increase density, but it is also to not impact the neighborhood where the density is increased. There are different issues to be developed. They mention one, but they forget the other. And these are all in the plan. They're already there, but they're just not all considered. So I have my proposal. I suggest it costs a few dollars, but it could help solve the problem long run. I'm not speaking in favor or against the motion because it doesn't do that. I don't really have that position. I do the best you can. Thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Christine Pitchinsley or Richinsley, followed by Benjamin Crandall.
Actually, it's Christine Ratchinsky, and I live at 2725 Potter Street in the Amazon neighborhood. And I'm here because we were planning on building something in our backyard. And I'm really, I understand having limits with secondary dwellings, but I'm concerned about this interim measure that's going to stop any secondary dwellings until I don't know when. So that's my main concern. And that's all I really wanted to say.
Thank you.
Benjamin Crandall, followed by Vicky DeRose.
Yeah, hello. Benjamin Crandall, also at 2725 Potter Street. So I think for me the big concern here is I think that there's should be a real distinction made between owner-occupied houses and absentee landlord houses, especially with regards to this interim measure with the prohibition of secondary dwellings. I think that there should be an exemption for if there is going to be a prohibition for secondary dwellings for this interim period. I think there should be an exemption for owner-occupied houses for that. I think that owners that live in the neighborhood are taking into account the character and needs of the neighborhood more so than absentee landlords. And I think a lot of the distinctions that have been made here this evening, I think that distinction between absentee landlord and owner-occupied, I think that needs to be made for a lot of these discussions that we're being had today. Another thing that's been discussed in regards to that is the number of unrelated people living in the house. I think that once again, in an owner-occupied situation, if somebody wants to allow their friends to live with them and that kind of thing, I think that is a very different thing than an absentee landlord that has 5 or more different people living in a house or on a property. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vicky DeRose, followed by Mike Urbanek.
Hi, my name is Vicki DeRose. I live currently at 2685 University, and we recently moved from just a couple blocks away at 1290 East 25th Avenue. And we moved because the house behind us was bought by a contractor and turned into a student rental. And I want to preface all this by saying I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, in the university neighborhood. I was a student myself in Berkeley. And lived in a university-like neighborhood. I'm very familiar with the requirements in this kind of a neighborhood for stability. And it's pretty clear that you need a certain population of owner-occupied family dwellings to mix in with student dwellings in order to keep stability in this kind of a place. So it's my opinion that the Amazon and SUNA neighborhoods are at a tipping point right now. There's a huge economic pressure to buy small houses and make them larger. And we moved because the house behind us was built 5 feet from our fence line. It was built high, blocked out light. It moved from a 2-person dwelling into a 5 unrelated person dwelling. And we had the prospect of 5 students on a small deck that would be overlooking our backyard. At the same time, we want to keep our old house a family-occupied house because I think that's very important for the neighborhood. We tried to sell the house this year, and the comments we got back from people visiting it through the realtors was that many people were turned off by the idea of being surrounded by student rentals. I also want to note that the house that was built next to us was clearly irreversibly made into a student rental. They built to 50% of the property. There's no yard. No family would want to live there. It's a student place. Let's see. I wanted to then, I'm speaking in favor, strong favor of the interim measures that you're proposing. I'm also very much in favor of considering limiting the number of unrelated students, I love students. I work at the university. My job is to teach students. But I'd like to speak in favor of limiting the number of unrelated people in these houses. I'm sure other university neighborhoods around the country have looked into this sort of a thing. I'm sure Eugene can learn from them. I'm sure many people have already studied that sort of a thing. I'm also in favor of a larger setback along fence lines and a really considered process in building things that that looks a lot into the effect of light on the neighbors and sight lines. I know these things are in the plan, but they're really critical, and they're the tipping point. If the house built next to us had been set back even 5 more feet,
if the overhanging deck wasn't there, if it wasn't quite so high, we might have stayed in that house and kept it as a single-family home. But instead, we moved actually to another house that had been built by a contractor who was considering making it into a 4 or 5 person rental, but thank goodness put it up on the market, and we snatched it up as a single family. And we've been thanked by the neighborhood there. So that's what I wanted to tell you, and thank you for your work for the city.
Thank you.
Mike Urbanak, followed by Pamela Miller.
My name is Mike Urbancic, and I live at 2227 Agate, which puts me just barely into the Fairmont neighborhood since it's on the east side of Agate. I and my family moved just a year ago. I'm unlike, I think, anyone else here in the sense that I'm very new to Eugene and the neighborhood. Mine was at that 2200 block of Agate, on the east side at least, there are 5 homes, 3 of which are now currently student rentals. And so when we moved in, it was a rental as well. It's a very old house, built originally in 1901, and lovingly remodeled by the former owner. And so fortunately, she'd had some bad experiences with some renters, and we were very fortunate in that she decided to take a chance on us, and we rented, and after 8 months, she decided to sell the property to us. So we're a rare example of a rental converting into owner-occupied housing in that neighborhood, and where we'd like to stay. So as I said, it's an old home, it's small. We'd like to house, at some point, a child or two in the accessory building. We'd like to eventually convert that. Not build any new structures on the property, but we'd like to convert that. And so one thing that I'm hearing a lot, and I've noticed in the discussions, is that there seem to be these parallel discussions and debates about density and about owner-occupied versus unrelated occupants. And these are actually 2 distinct debates that, yes, have high correlation and they intermingle quite a lot, but I think there needs to be more clarity moving forward about what the true goals are. Is the owner-occupied versus unrelated occupants, the students and that influence in those neighborhoods, is that really the core issue? Is that simply a premise for a pretext for talking about density? I think that both are valid concerns. They just need to be addressed, I think, effectively according to what the goals truly are. And I think, as was mentioned in previous comments, I think revisiting, I think being more direct about if it truly the owner-occupied versus unrelated occupants is the dimension that really is mattering to the character of these neighborhoods, we should address that more directly in the interim measures or beyond, with a more comprehensive set of measures with limiting the number of unrelated occupants. I think that's a more effective and direct way to attack that problem. And I would say, in general, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Try to make exemptions where possible for those single-family units so that the owner-occupiers so it is an attractive option for them to be in those neighborhoods. I don't want to be forced out as my family grows up and grows too large for this house. I'd like to actually stay on that property and be that owner-occupier in that neighborhood. I love living where I live. Thanks.
Thank you.
Pamela Miller, followed by Brian Leichhardt.
Good evening. Pamela Miller, residing at 1959 Harris Street since 1986, I believe. Anyway, I would like to address a few things. One is regarding the interim measures. The suggestion that the neighborhoods would like to have those go on forever so that they could be protected is preposterous. We have been waiting for 6 years for something to happen, tearing out our hair, watching our neighborhood go down the drain while the wonderful Pillar 8 in Envision Eugene is worshipped but not followed through on. I like Carolyn Jacobs' suggestion that there be a sunset to both creating a neighborhood plan and the interim measures so that there is some incentive on the part of planners to help us get a plan that works for our neighborhood, and also to allow us to have property owners in that area go forward with their plans as soon as possible. Another thing that I would like to address is the adjustment review part of the code restrictions or amendments. Unfortunately, I think codes are designed to be sure that we prevent what we don't want to happen, but it seems like it's hard to figure out how to make sure we allow what we want to happen. And one of the things that causes me a little bit of concern is, from as many people have spoken, homeowners who are committed to the neighborhood and want to do something that would enhance their property, not intrude on their neighbors, may be limited or forced to do something that would actually not be good for their property or not as good for their property or their neighbors because of the code. And if the adjustment review can perhaps reflect, and in the latest modification I saw this start to be addressed, that there are some basic things we're trying to accomplish, such as preservation of privacy of adjoining property owners, preservation of solar access, of open space and existing vegetation, mitigation of potential for noise pollution and parking congestion in the neighborhood, and facilitating the compatibility of new structures with existing architectural historic structures. If it were clearly stated that any adjustment review shall ensure that the accomplishment of these priorities is preserved or enhanced by the design proposal, that might make it clearer that changes are to be enacted to make things better, not to get through loopholes. For example, in the case of two property owners perhaps who are adjoining and both want to do an accessory dwelling unit, I don't see any way that they could do something like either common wall or zero lot line so that they create a way to preserve more of their open space and their vegetation and also not impose on one another's visual and sound privacies because the common walls would not have openings to one another, or basically thinking about ways to make it possible to do a better job of accomplishing the goals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Lightheart, followed by Beth O'Halloran.
My name's Brian Lightheart. I reside at 2870 Baker Boulevard, so I'm an Amazon neighbor. I don't have any prepared remarks, but on the theory that just showing up is about 90% of living, I'm here. It's pretty clear that there's a lot of pressure to exploit to the fullest extent possible the property near the university. And it's very evident that whatever regulations are in place either aren't being enforced or are inadequate. So I'm here in support of the interim measures mainly because there's a fair amount of opposition to what has been developed up to this point to be instituted, and that means to me that there needs to be more thought put into it.
Thank you.
Beth O'Halloran, followed by Randy Prince.
So forgive me because I also came unprepared to talk. I'm a new resident of the South Eugene neighborhood, Amazon, I guess it is, 2790 Eleanor. I purchased the house this summer with my mom. It's a corner lot, and our intention was to, as she needs to move closer to me, to add a secondary dwelling unit. So this is a learning curve for me, coming tonight and seeing how large the problem is. I thought that being out at 28th or 29th, I would sort of avoid the university situation. I also don't want to live near students. I work with them, but would prefer to live further away. I'm concerned that, again, like some people have said, that this would be a lockdown, and I would like to know that there would be exceptions for owner-occupied properties for sort of the true mother secondary dwelling unit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Randy Prince. That's our last one.
I'm Randy Prince. I live at 2599 Onyx. It's in the Amazon neighborhood, and I serve as chair of the Amazon Neighbors Association. We're looking to protect the livability, our neighborhood character, the things that we value now. The people who live in my neighborhood want to keep some of what they bought into. And also the process of Envision Eugene, the community is looking to increase the density and things like walkability, biking, less driving, having more services close by, and to reverse that trend to urban sprawl that we saw over many decades, kind of in some ways going back to older patterns that were characteristic during the time my neighborhood was built. Density doesn't have to mean a slum character. It could, though, or it can be sort of a vibrant community. Closeness. And it's the latter that we're looking for. In our neighborhood, which is close to campus, I think it's justified to apply these interim protection strict level until we've looked again at what kind of infill would be permitted. We are close to campus. There are increasing property values and a lot of economic pressure to develop to the maximum. And specifically, two items that have been discussed by our neighborhood association. One, solar access. At one time, the community put in a solar access protection law. A lot of the protections were removed. And that especially affected our neighborhood with the orientation of our lots and the fact that they're narrow. I think it's 75 or 90 feet, and that they run the long way, long direction to the south, has left many houses in the shadows by some new developments. So the height restrictions are very important. I would suggest simply looking to see how the old solar protection ones that were made not that long ago in a sort of inspired state, are we keeping those? Because that's a good idea, and that's a part of livability, the right to sunlight, the right to have some sun on your garden and sunshine through your window. That affects the secondary dwellings and the alley units. And speaking of the alleys, that's the other one. Our neighborhood, with all this economic pressure, has a lot of alleys, and they're all unpaved. Now, the streets, we're looking to increase walkability and driving. We want to see that there's sidewalks and that people are safe, they're calm, and everything. Alleys are full of potholes, and really, as far as all year round, 24 hours a day, that's a car transportation method. Unless the alleys are limited, the number of cars that are going down there, we're actually going the wrong direction as far as auto orientation versus a close walking, bicycling community. I would suggest that alley access lots not even be allowed or that not be built on unless the alley is up to the standard we want, that it is an all-weather surface, that bicyclists, walkers, wheelchairs, bike trailers, they can all go down just as easy as cars. So those are two issues that justify the interim protection, making sure the alley access isn't there when the buildings aren't built unless the access is there for all modes of transit, and make sure we have solar access. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else? Yes. Okay. Yes, if at this point, if there is anyone who has not yet spoken who would like to, please take advantage of this opportunity. She's not wanting to speak.
Yes,
okay.
I want to speak.
Okay. At this point, I believe I will close the public hearing, but we did have one request to leave the record open, and would like to get opinions on that. Commissioner Duncan?
I only heard one person request approximately a week extension.
That's what I recorded as well.
I move that we extend the record for 1 week to end.
Be at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, September 17th.
Thank you.
Second. I'll second
Okay.
that.
Okay, so we have a move and a second discussion. Any discussion on that? Okay. All those in favor of leaving the record open until Tuesday, September 17th at 5 p.m. indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. So,
And just for clarity, that testimony can either be submitted to my email, it can be dropped off at the atrium building, or we can submit it via the website as well. And I will send out an email to folks reminding them or letting people know that the record's been left open.
Okay.
Alyssa, could you just go ahead and give everybody your email address right now?
I would love to. Okay, let me spell it for you. It's Alyssa, ALISSA, .H, the letter H, and then .Hansen, HANSEN, SEN at ci.eugene.or.us. You can also find me on the city's website.
And I guess I have a question. Was the agenda also printed for people to receive, because your email is on that?
Okay, we did not print that.
Did not print
but
that,
it's
okay.
available via the website.
Okay. All right. And at this point then, I'll open it up for questions that we as a commission may have for staff to get to us by the time we deliberate. Commissioner Duncan.
I've actually submitted a number of questions already to staff, but one that came up was I'd like some input on the concept of unrelated parties, how best to define that, because I don't believe it's defined in our code, because given current living situations, there's a lot of people who may be, quote, unrelated that are really related. So I'd like some input on how we would be able to best describe that if we chose to go that way. And then follow up on that, are there any housing restrictions through HUD or anyone else that we need to be aware of in developing any code if we go that way? Thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Borofsky.
Just a couple of things that I would like to have brought back. In regard to Mr. Conte's testimony about the findings, just if you could talk to us about whether the findings that you've put forward you feel are appropriate. I'd be interested to know about that. The other one, Mr. Atley from the Walnut Co-op talked about the third bedroom. As it is, I pulled a permit for a kitchen at my house. I have a 4-bedroom house. I would have hated to have to remodel my kitchen and lose one of my bedrooms. So if
That's not the intent, so
correct. But
yes.
That would be something that I'd like to look at. And then the third thing that is going to be very important to me is the enforcement. You know, how are we going to write the enforcement? It seems to me that a lot of the issues that we're dealing with could be taken care of with proper enforcement of even of the codes that we have today. You know, I've heard many testimonies about, you know, units that are out of compliance right now and the codes aren't being enforced. So I think that is something that I would really be interested in knowing the direction that we're going to be going with. And then the final thing that I'm going to be wanting to hear more on is the time frame for the interim measures. I think that's real important in balancing. You know, when I was reading the testimony that we got submitted electronically, I would turn one page and be, I'm for the interim measures because of this, and the next page, and it would be a very compelling argument. And then the very next page would be, I'm against the interim measures because of this. I've got this property. And it would also be a compelling argument. So to me, if I'm going to be in favor of the interim measures, which I think have merit, it has to do with how long and how we are going to move past those interim measures so that people who have a legitimate need or want to make adjustments to their property know that, okay, yes, this is going to happen. So those are the things that I'm going to be looking for.
Okay. And I have myself in the queue with some questions also, and I have also submitted questions earlier, but based on testimony tonight, I too have similar questions as Commissioner Borofsky as far as the minimum lot size and R1 density issues that Mr. Conte brought up, and then also the issue of looking at the number of unrelated individuals and enforcement. I think those two are, I think we heard a lot of testimony regarding that tonight, and I think those are things that we really need to consider. And then, let me look here. I think the timing of interim measures as far as a sunset that was suggested by Carolyn. And I think those are my questions that I have at this point. Commissioner Belcher.
Yes, as well as the ones we've heard already. I just want to for you to make clear that if indeed we're imposing interim measures in an area that is also the area that's intended for the area study, the original area study didn't include all of these neighborhoods, so that's why I'm concerned. Mr. Conti also mentioned that he felt that R15 didn't meet the R1 density standards either, so if you could respond to that as well. And as we talk about unrelated individuals, I think there needs to be some looking at the issue of co-housing. So if you could give us some feedback about how co-housing could or couldn't be allowed in that process, that would be useful to me. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Duncan.
Yeah, I'd like to speak a little bit again on enforcement. Being one of the people that has sat on the Planning Commission for a fairly long time now, we continually talk about enforcement, and yet we continually talk about how we can't afford it, and it's always complaint-driven. And I think the issue of, particularly as we age as a community and I decide that I want to take an extended vacation, the level of verification that is put upon a property owner, I've got an idea that staff may not even understand the magnitude of what that could actually be. People travel a lot, and the way that it's currently written, somebody's got to be passing in notes and getting people to sign off on a variety of documents. And I'd like to get an idea from staff how they think this is actually going to be enforced, so that we don't end up writing another enforcement code that we all point at it 5 years from now and say, see, there's another one we haven't been able to do. So I'd like some thought in how it's done and how we're going to budget it and so on. If we're going to have enforcement for it to be appropriate, it cannot be a complaint-driven process, because you end up having people basically tattle on each other all the time, which doesn't help neighborhood. So I'd like some input from staff on kind of how it's done other places in an effective way. Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? Okay, seeing none, then just a reminder that the public record has been left open until Tuesday, September 17th at 5 p.m. Alyssa gave it her best shot to read her email to you, and so you can either get that to her via email or at the city offices. And with that, I will close the meeting. Thank you all for coming.